All right, good evening. Hope that everybody is doing well. Good to see a couple of faces who we haven't seen in a while. Welcome back. And for those who were with us last week, you know that we started into a new Heschel essay. This time, Heschel is turning his trademark prophetic fire instead of against the um, racial indifference of America against a new target, namely the Conservative Rabbis Union. This is a speech that he delivered in 1953 at the Rabbinical Assembly gathering on the Jersey Shore, in which he called rabbis to task for creating synagogues, which are zones of religious behaviorism, places where people go through the motion, read the script, stand up, sit down, and take a bow, but don't actually allow for the transformation of soul, for the kind of emotional, even ecstatic encounter that Heschel believes is not only possible in prayer, but is the essence of real prayer. That prayer is not just and can't just be a matter of that which is keva, that which is fixed and set. Prayer has to be thoroughly infused with kavanah, with the intention of the heart. And we talked about last class the Kabbalistic metaphor of keva and kavanah being in relationship like a pitcher and water. Keva is the pitcher, it is the framework, it is what holds the life-giving substance, but it is not itself the life-giving substance. A dry pitcher will not quench your thirst. It's the water, it's the living substance which makes possible the continuation of life that the pitcher contains, that is the point. Without the pitcher, of course, the water is a puddle. It's very hard to access. The pitcher, the keva, the structure gives us access to the spiritual richness, but it is not itself the spiritual richness. It's not itself the essential thing. And Heschel, coming from a lineage on both sides of his family, from great Hasidic rabbis who can trace themselves all the way back to the Baal Shem Tov, to the founder of the Hasidic movement, Heschel is steeped in a world in which prayer matters deeply, and in which prayer is not just a matter of lip service, but is avodat halev, is the work of the heart, is the service of the soul in its encounter with the Holy One, who is real and imminently present for all of us if we just open up. One of the great Hasidic teachers who Heschel revered wrote his last book, or one of his last books about, is Rebbe Menachem Mendel of Kotsk, the Kotzker Rebbe. And the Kotzker Rebbe's student asked, "Where is God to be found?" And the Kotzker famously responded back, "God is to be found wherever you let God in." That God is always present. It is people that keep God at a distance. Um, but Heschel really truly believed that any one of us could open up the door and could open up our hearts. And he was thoroughly mystified and quite disheartened by the state of the American synagogue in the middle of the 20th century, a place that he describes as full of formality and precise, well oiled liturgy, but utterly lacking in surprise, in spirit, in transformational capacity. Now, it was very heartening to me when we started looking at this material last week that a great many of you who are regular congregants at CBI said, "I don't recognize the kind of prayer setting that Heschel is dismissing here, is judging here. That's not our synagogue." And that made me smile and made me feel good. And I have walked around all week feeling good that people don't feel, on the whole, that CBI is the place where prayer comes to die, the graveyard of buried spirituality. That's That's a good, it's a low threshold, but I'm glad that for most of you, we are clearing it. And yet, while I think Heschel would have enjoyed a service with Cantor Amy, just as I enjoy every single service that we do together, I think Heschel would, in his prophetic voice, continue to challenge us to do better. Every single one of us to challenge the leaders, to challenge the congregants, to challenge all of us to take our prayer deeper, to open up more fully, to risk in the prayer encounter being authentically touched and changed. I think having Heschel's provocation in our ears and in our mind is important for keeping us from becoming complacent in our spiritual life, just as having Heschel's provocation in our ears and mind is important for keeping us from becoming complacent in our social life. We have made great strides forward from the segregated America that he was decrying in 1963. We have made great strides forward from the rather desiccated state of conservative Judaism in the 1950s. We have made tremendous progress. And on both of those fronts, on racial equality and on spiritual awakeness, we have so much further to go. So I am heartened that there was some pushback as we read, and I hope that there will be some similar pushback in which people will say, we're doing better than what he's accusing us of. And I imagine, by the way, people living in Jeremiah's day or Amos's day 2,000 years ago also said to those prophets, you're not being quite fair to us. Not everybody is cheating in business. Not everybody is oppressing the poor. Some of us are actually trying our best to live up to what God expects of us. But the prophets, as we read from Heschel's first chapter of the prophets, from his doctoral dissertation, the prophets are harsh. They are judgmental. And they persistently challenge our sense of self-satisfaction. And so I read this Heschel as a direct challenge to me as somebody who convenes people in prayer on a regular basis, and as somebody who feels that my second home is a prayer sanctuary. And I want us to all read this, whatever our relationship is with prayer, whether we are regular synagogue goers or not, to read this as a challenge of what can we do to open ourselves up a little bit more, to take ourselves one step deeper, and to never, ever, ever become complacent. So with that, I'm gonna share screen, and we'll turn to the text. I sent a link out to this essay in the email today. Hopefully everybody got it. I'm going to put it into the chat as well, so that if you have not seen it yet or would like to have it on your own computer, you can take a look. Can everybody see my screen?
Yep.
Hopefully the text is big enough. I have scrolled down just a little bit from where we were, and invite you to pick up with me here. Heschel has many, many wonderful qualities in his writing. His prose is poetry. His turns of phrase are remarkably beautiful, and there are lines of Heschel that once read live with you forever. But he is so repetitive. The man says the same idea over and over again, 6 different ways. He is a rabbi after all. This is one of the things that we do. So I'm abbreviating here by skipping ahead, not because what we skipped over isn't beautiful, but because he said it already, and then he said it again. And now he's about to say it again, but this is a good place for us to pick up. Heschel, it is well known, wrote many of his books on index cards. Have we talked about this before? He would write his books on index cards while commuting by train into the city to teach at the Jewish Theological Seminary, and then hand his index cards to a student who would then type them up into his book form. And if Heschel often reads like a collection of discrete sequential thoughts rather than a complete flowed argument, it's because that's actually how he was writing. He was writing in these index card pericopes that would get strung together. And there is a story told by one of Heschel's students about a time that he was handed a stack of note cards from his teacher to type them up, and he dropped them and was forced to try his best to figure out the sequence of what Professor Heschel had wanted. And in one of the books, it may be God in Search of Man or another one, I don't remember to which book this pertained. There are a couple of sections that don't make a whole lot of sense. And it turned out later on that was actually the section where the student dropped the note cards. I have a feeling, that probably happens with paleontologists too, right? The bones, I don't know, they fit together like this puzzle. Who really knows? Nobody's ever really seen a brontosaurus, so who knows if they're fitting them together right? Who knows if people were putting Heschel's ideas in the right order? Anyway, so a lot of it reads that way. Assembled in the synagogue, everything is there. The body, the benches, the books. But one thing is absent, neshama, soul. Heschel is a Hasid, steeped in Kabbalistic language and lore. In Kabbalah and Jewish mysticism, there are many dimensions to soul. At very least three, probably many more. There is at the base level, nefesh. Nefesh simply means life. Anything which is alive has a nefesh. One level higher is ruach, is spirit, is breath, is the capacity to communicate, the capacity that sets humans apart from the animal kingdom. We have a ruach. The highest level of soul is neshama. That's the part of the soul which is the connection point between heaven and earth. It is possible to be a nefesh, a plant. It is possible to be a ruach, a beast, but only a human being can possess a neshama. Yes. And so when Heschel says one thing is absent, the neshama, he's not just saying that life is absent from the synagogue. There are people in the synagogue, but what's missing is the higher order of spirituality. What's missing is the part of our soul that yearns to return to its maker. It is as if they all suffered from spiritual absenteeism. Spiritual absenteeism. The body is here, but the neshama is somewhere else. In good prayer, words become one with the soul. Yet in our synagogues, people who are otherwise sensitive, vibrant, arresting, sit there aloof, listless, lazy. Lo hametim yehallelujah. This is a line from Hallel. The dead cannot praise you, O Lord. So where we finished off last week, we were ragging on rabbis. Now we get to rag on congregants just a little bit, though I think he included everybody here. But he says, we are in a room full of people who all ostensibly are there to pray. How come these vibrant, sensitive, brilliant souls who are sitting in the pews, who make up our communities, full of teachers and healers and thinkers and doers, all of these remarkable people, how come people become so passive in synagogue? And that is a real phenomenon, right? People who hold advanced degrees, who have done remarkable jobs, who are people who are quite impressive, even quite powerful out in the world, but once they sit in the pews, are somehow reduced to just following along and to feeling perpetually a little bit lost. Why is it that our synagogues don't always bring out the best in us, but rather seem to be a place where people feel so comfortable falling asleep, maybe with their eyes closed, maybe even with their eyes open. By the way, I'll just share a story from Rabbi Eddie Feinstein, who I revere, senior rabbi, now Rabbi Emeritus of Valley Beth Shalom, heir to Rabbi Harold Schulweis, greatest pulpit rabbi of the 20th century. And Rabbi Eddie's father, a baker, would attend his services. He lived to almost 100, I believe. He lived a very long time. And he would fall asleep in shul almost every week. And at one point, Ed said to his father, it's really not like such a great glowing endorsement of your son that you come to my shul and you fall asleep. And his father said back to him, the sweetest sleep in the world is shul sleep. It's made only sweeter when your son is the rabbi. So I told my parents that they have full permission to fall asleep because they should be able to enjoy the sweetest of the sweet, shul sleep while your son is the rabbi. That said, I 100%, the acoustics at CBI are such that from the Bima, I can hear everything. I can hear every whisper of discontent. I can hear every person shushing their kid. And I can hear the snoring that often emanates from certain parts of the room. And I even know without looking whose snoring is whose, right? We come to shul and we snooze. And that's a wonderful sign of feeling at home and comfortable. But Heschel wants us to be doing something a whole lot more intensive in our prayer settings than being lulled to sleep. Heschel wants us to be, in the vernacular of our day, woke in our prayers. Wants us to be awake to what the prayers are calling us to, what the reality of relationship with God is all about. And if prayer is lulling us to sleep, it is failing to do its spiritual work. So Heschel says, we suffer from the challenge of spiritual absenteeism, of living bodies with nefesh, nefashot, and ruchot, with living souls, but lacking neshama, lacking that divine essence, that part of us that cries out. And the choice to quote that line from Psalms, Lo hameti hallelujah, the dead cannot praise, is particularly arresting. He's a little bit of a sarcastic jerk at various points in this speech. All of you are dead. Well, he is prophetic and he is challenging us. That we sense that this is a problem, and continuing on, is evidenced by the many valiant but futile attempts to deal with it. The problem, namely, of how to increase synagogue attendance. A variety of suggestions have been made to bring the Siddur up to date by composing shorter and better prayers, to invite distinguished speakers, radio commentators, and columnists, to arrange congregational forums, panels, and symposia, to celebrate projects like Jewish Culture Shabbat, Jewish Veteran Shabbat, Boy Scout Shabbat, Interfaith Shabbat. Why not Shabbat Shabbat? To install stained glass windows, to place gold, silver, or blue pledge cards in the seats, to remind people of their birthdays. Well-intentioned as these suggestions may be, they do not deal with the core of the issue. Spiritual problems will not be solved by administrative techniques. Ouch! Ouch! I spend my life, your staff spends our time on what program do we think is going to draw people to the shul. This is what we talk about. If we were better at calling people for their birthdays, if we were better at creating more themes, what should we serve? Should it be schnitzel night or shawarma night? Because we all know if you feed them, they will come. And Heschel says, you can't solve a spiritual problem with schnitzel, and Heschel is wrong about that. You can solve many a spiritual problem with schnitzel, but he's also not totally wrong. He's wrong that these things don't work to draw some. Well, I don't think he's wrong. I don't think that he thinks that these things don't draw some people. If you have a scout Shabbat, scouts show up. If you have a good speaker, people will show up. There will be more attendance. But his issue isn't bodies in the seats, it's souls in the seats. And techniques to drive attendance are not the same as cultivating in people a sense that their soul needs what's happening in this building. And that, he says, is the unaddressed problem. That we know how to bring bodies together. We don't know how to bring souls together. Let's talk about that. Tilda.
I think that the very last point, I don't think he was asking for attendance in the first half of the essay. So sort of switching to attendance as the metric at the end seems like a little bit of a swap. But the point that he's making towards the end there seems a little bit like money can't buy happiness. Money can't buy happiness, but poverty can buy misery. And if you have money, you can avoid some of that misery and it lets you focus on the happiness, right? Like administrative solutions may not solve spiritual problems, but if you have administrative problems and spiritual problems, you're probably not going to solve the spiritual problems first.
That is really well said and frankly somewhat comforting. As a reminder, right? If the synagogue is in, I have worked for institutions that have been in terrible fiscal shape. And let me tell you, when an organization is in terrible fiscal shape, it's very hard to do meaningful work because all of the attention goes to staunching the bleeding, and the ability to direct any attention anywhere else is deeply limited by the existential challenge. It's very nice to work in an institution that tomorrow night, God willing, and all CBI members should show up for the congregational meeting, is going to pass a balanced budget. That's very nice. Is the spiritual work of CBI to balance its budget? No, the spiritual work of CBI is to uplift the families who are a part of it and create a community that draws from Jewish wisdom to create a sense of family connection, meaning, and purpose. But if we didn't have a balanced budget, it would be all the harder to be able to get to those higher goals. Maybe this is a sort of Maslow pyramid sort of situation. And everybody's familiar with that idea from the Jewish psychologist Abraham Maslow that says at the base of your pyramid are your fundamental biological needs. And only when your fundamental biological needs are met can you move up the pyramid to higher needs. Only when you get higher needs met can you get to lofty spiritual goals and a sense of meaning and purpose and self-actualization. If you're hungry, the only thing you can focus on is being hungry. You can't focus on meaningful work. You can't focus on spiritual connection. And so if the synagogue is broke, or if no one's in the building, we're not going to attain that high level that that Heschel is calling for. And maybe the best that sometimes can be done is to, in a difficult climate for religious life in America, to at very least make sure you're not bleeding. But Heschel would have us go further than that. Okay. Make sure there are people there. Make sure the budget's balanced. Make sure you're collecting your dues. And then do something with that. Don't allow the place to be overflowing with people and yet underfilled with prayer. There's a story of a student who goes to their teacher and proudly brags that they have been through the entire Talmud 10 times. And the teacher says back to the student, "Great, you've been through the Talmud 10 times. How many times has the Talmud been through you?" It is possible to read all of the words and internalize none of them. It is possible to have a packed house that is devoid of spiritual depth. But starting with a packed house is certainly better than being in a place where no one shows up. Thank you for that point. Well said. Other thoughts or reactions to Heschel's diagnosis of the challenge that we put too much emphasis on what we think will drive physical attendance and less emphasis than we ought on what it means to spiritually show up. Maybe let's press a little further then. The problem is not how to fill the buildings, but how to inspire the hearts. And this is a problem to which techniques of child psychology can hardly be applied. Ouch again. The problem is not one of synagogue attendance, but of spiritual attendance. The problem is not how to attract bodies to enter the space of a temple, but how to inspire souls to enter an hour of spiritual concentration in the presence of God. The problem is time, not space. Many of us have come across one of Heschel's most famous and accessible works, The Sabbath. If you've not read Heschel's The Sabbath, it is a very worthy project and an easy one. Heschel's The Sabbath is less than 100 pages. It is a love poem to Shabbat. It is a composition in honor of a day that Heschel considers an island in time, a place to recharge and reconnect with the best in us. And Heschel's central thesis through the Sabbath is that Jews, as a people who constantly wandered, did not sanctify space. Instead, we sanctified time. That to build a cathedral was the work of settled people who could build a great edifice to God in a project that might span lifetimes. There is something so powerful when you go to the great cathedrals in Europe to know that people labored on those cathedrals, knowing that even if they worked their whole lives, they would never see its completion, that they were building for the future, that these projects were projects so far beyond the scope of any one woman or man. They were great collective projects in service of God that were constructed over the span of centuries. They are awe-inspiring. But Heschel says, rightly, Jews haven't had the luxury of being in one place long enough to build something that would be constructed over centuries and could be expected to last even longer. Jews have always been, at least for the last 2,000 years, a people on the move. And so we constructed, he said, our cathedrals in time. The Sabbath is our cathedral in time, our portable sanctuary that doesn't exist in space. It's Sabbath wherever you are. It can be Sabbath in nature. It can be Sabbath in a synagogue building. It can be Sabbath even if you don't pay attention to Sabbath at all. Sabbath exists outside of place. Sabbath exists instead as an edifice in time. And Heschel brings that theme here to say our challenge is not a challenge of place. Our challenge is not a challenge of buildings with pews either filled or not. Our challenge is a challenge of time. It is how do we invite people to dedicate, to set apart. The Hebrew word kadosh, holy, means to be set apart. How do we invite people and encourage people and make clear to people why they ought to make time holy? So Heschel offers a challenge. It's not enough to fill the building. You got to encourage people to believe that it's worth filling up their hearts. And he's going to start to dig deeper into what he believes are some of the challenges to prayer. It's not just that we are selfish and lazy, though of course we are those things. There are real philosophical challenges. There are real reasons why prayer is hard. And Heschel acknowledges that prayer is hard. And we're going to turn to that in a moment. But first, we're going to hear from Howard and then Luciana.
Thank you, Rabbi. I get the impression that Heschel, when he talks about the need to create a sanctuary in time and to fill it with kavana, and that it's a crisis of lack of meaningfulness, that the meaning is arising from an idea that you are in crisis, and therefore you need to reach out to God. And I'm wondering if what he's really decrying is the late, the mid 20th century American Jew, or Jews in America, have lost their connection to this because Jews in America are so bourgeois, are so successful, are so there's no crisis in our life that is connected specifically with Jewishness. And now I think we have it. We have it back. I think if Heschel is right, I forecast that people are going to approach going to shul with a whole new attitude.
Not enough crisis. That's an interesting diagnosis. It's an interesting thing to have come from a man in 1953 whose whole family was murdered 10 years earlier, and to come to the United States, to a place of relative stability and freedom at that time for Jews, and to say, I am a brand plucked from the fire, and I know it. And you have gotten too comfortable. That's an interesting, it's an interesting read.
He may not have, I'm not saying he necessarily thought this consciously, but I'm saying if you look at the contrast between his background and the background of most of the people he was talking to.
Sure, sure.
And maybe he felt like, well, you should be thanking God from the bottom of your heart, and that this won't happen here, or hasn't happened here.
Though it's a very interesting point, Howard, and I'd like to continue to trace it through as we read further. I think one of the critiques I can anticipate, though, is that Heschel is critical of communal solidarity as a substitute for authentic piety. That a lot of people find great meaning in gathering together as a response to crisis, but that doesn't necessarily translate to finding their souls in the process. We certainly saw a surge in synagogue attendance after October the 7th. And that was not just true in Orange County, that was true across the board in synagogues. There was a sense of we need to stand with our people. And there is a powerful motivation in crisis to find your people. The question I think he would ask, and we could ask, is, did that translate into a deeper sense of spiritual connection, a greater sense of moral sensitivity? Or was that simply a matter of sociological solidarity? I don't know the answer, right? I think that's an interesting thing to interrogate. Does crisis bring people actually to God, or does it just bring people to attendance in roughly the same way as Boy Scout Shabbat? I don't know. Interesting point. Interesting. Luciana, please.
Sorry, I forgot I was muted. In the previous discussion, I think the comment about European cathedrals, right? That there's that permanence and people in generations building something. I think that the fact that for Jews over time, you build that cathedral, as you're mentioning, in time, in various groups of people, reading the book and having that community in all sorts of places, independent of the place, right? It always had meaning to me in the sense that there is this individual experience, right? That we're all trying to show up, like as souls, but how we show up, right? It may be as diverse, right, as you can be. So I wonder what Herschel would have said in the sense that he says, oh, I want people to show up spiritually. But does he have a more kind of understanding what that means, or is there an openness to different types of showing up, and that's still spiritual showing up as a soul?
So let's look at, thank you. Let's look at some of his diagnoses of why prayer is challenging, and maybe that will help to add some to both Howard and Luciana's observations about what kind of showing up, what does it mean to actually show up, is he driving us towards? Prayer is an extremely embarrassing phenomenon. Numerous attempts have been made to define it and to explain it. I will briefly mention 4 of the prevalent doctrines. What do you think he means by prayer is embarrassing? Anybody have a thought about what he means there? Yeah. What does he mean?
Have you ever prayed and been the one person in a room praying while other people who are not involved, who are not participating in the activity, are like also there? Mortifying. Truly mortifying. It involves a vulnerability and a synthesis of tradition and intention, and perhaps expression of something meaningful. And if you are to engage in a sort of genuine prayer, which is to say that you synthesize an understanding of the world and your place in it, and an intention of like gratitude or desire for change or theory of change, you need to really be present in yourself and in the world and see things as they are to experience that.
So to be fully immersed in the spiritual experience, in a setting in which other people are there to check their box or whatever reason they're there, it's embarrassing to be that vulnerable, to be the one sitting there crying or having an ecstatic experience, while everybody else is sort of looking around being like, is this dude okay? Yeah. Oh, thank you. Beth.
Conversely, I think for those who may not have been raised, may have been raised in a Jewish home, in a traditional Jewish home with the holidays, but not in in an environment in which the liturgy is known like the back of their hand, one can feel judged and ignorant in a space where there appear to be people around you who know exactly what the next prayer that's coming up is and actually understand what it means, and so, I think when Heschel came, when Heschel was alive, we weren't nearly as diverse in our observance as we are today. I mean, even within one congregation, even within the conservative movement, you will find people at every point on the continuum. And so I think it is not merely vulnerable for those who are deeply experiencing their religion. It's vulnerable for people who wish they understood what was going on, but don't. And nobody ever stops to say, for those of you that don't understand what this prayer means, let me share a little bit about why we do this every Shabbat.
It is amazing how people who are quite learned, quite successful in so very many areas of their life walk into a prayer setting and feel so very lost so much of the time. And adults sure don't like that feeling. Kids are like little kids, know that they don't know anything. And they experience the world as a whole collection of, I get to learn how to do this and I get to learn how to do that. We cross a certain threshold and we don't want to show up someplace unless we feel competent. And that feeling of lack of competence is distressing, especially when we tell ourselves the story, true or partially true or mostly false, that the people to our right and the people to our left are so much more competent than we are. and a perception that we have some blinking sign over our head that says, this person doesn't know. And that feeling is embarrassing. It is distressing to feel like we don't know. And for a great many people, it's the reason that they don't continue in the pursuit of learning Jewish prayer, because to learn Jewish prayer is to spend a significant amount of time as a beginner and to have to work through months or years of feeling out of place before one starts to feel like an insider, because it is a challenging liturgy to learn. I would tell my introduction to Judaism students who would ask, how do I start to feel comfortable in a Jewish prayer setting? I would say, come for a year and expect that you'll spend a year lost. And at the end of a year, if you come consistently, you'll be much more found. But who wants to tolerate spending a year, a week in, week out, feeling lost? That's a lot of time in our busy lives. And I say to them, if you only come sporadically, I guarantee you, you'll never feel comfortable. For the people who come only a couple of times a year, it is a self-fulfilling prophecy that they feel alienated from the liturgy, because there is no way to learn this skill a couple of times a year. I'm not suggesting, Beth, that you're one of them. You are a regular shul goer. But for the vast majority of American Jews who are not regular shul goers, there is a sort of feedback loop that says, I don't go because I feel lost. And when I do go, I feel lost. So I don't go back because I felt lost. And so when the next time I do go, I still feel lost. And that reinforces itself. And that's a very hard loop to break.
The truth is, it does apply to me. I just feel lost, but I come when I can. But I mean, it is a strange feeling to have been actively Jewish my whole life, and yet to not really connect with the prayers. I enjoy them. I sing them. I know how to do them. So don't apologize. I mean, I probably am that example. And but I do enjoy your services.
Well, and I enjoy having you there. And I'm sorry that we don't do more for all of us, because all of us have that challenge. I'm a weird bird in that I got to UCLA as an undergraduate, the Jewiest person I had ever met. I was the most Jewish person. I went to a high school of 4,500 students, 1,200 in my graduating class. There were 5 Jews. I was so Jewish. And I got to UCLA Hillel, and they started singing songs on Friday night, and I didn't know a damn word. I didn't know a word of them. And I was the most Jewish person I'd ever met. And most people's response to that is to leave and never come back. I mean, we know that. We know that sociologically, most people walk into a space, feel lost and stupid, and don't come back. And I don't know what was my issue at 18, but for whatever reason, I kept coming back because I felt I had to learn this. But I recognize that makes me odd. And I recognize that degree of discomfort is deeply off-putting. Prayer is hard. Jewish prayer is really hard. It's really hard. And it's hard not just until you know it. It's also hard once you do know it. As I'd often say to Introduction to Judaism students, the hardest thing is not knowing the Hebrew. The second hardest thing, but very shortly thereafter, is knowing the Hebrew and then having to decide how you feel about saying these words. When they're a mantra, you don't have to encounter difficult and embarrassing questions about belief. When all of a sudden you know what it means, then you have to ask yourself a whole nother set of embarrassing questions, which is, do I believe this stuff? Do I relate to it? How does it interact with my life story and with my fundamental approach to the world. And what happens when there's an incompatibility there? So prayer is embarrassing at one level because it's hard and makes many of us feel lost and incompetent. Prayer is also hard because even once we obtain that skill, it asks of us to entertain a whole collection of ideas that may or may not be compatible with our worldview. Please, Aaron, then Mimi.
I feel like this conversation kind of ties into his criticism in the first place. As a teacher, I see so often that students who can barely decode paragraphs in English, and we're asking them to analyze complex graphs and make mathematical comparisons, they can't do that because they're so worried about sounding out the words. And I feel like if I don't know the solution, but I think there are so many barriers to prayer that if we're trying to both follow along and sing and know the melody and be reading in a language that we may or may not be very comfortable reading, to then also have the kavanah of conversing with God, that's a lot to ask of people, even people who are more advanced and are coming every week. Having all of those things line up is a really demanding thing. And Heschel is rightfully so, but asking a lot of us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, he is. Yes, he is. Yeah, Mimi, please.
But do you have to know the prayers real well in the Hebrew and the melodies and all of that to not feel the closest with God that your whole neshama is, that all the parts of you, your nefesh and the ruach and the neshama are all working together?
Do you have to know everything in order to feel something? No, of course you don't. But are there many places, as I think Aaron is pointing us to, where we can get tripped up? Sure. Right? We can get tripped up on the theology, or we can get tripped up on the musicality, or we can get tripped up on the language. And any one of those are places where we could find ourselves running into a wall that's hard for some of us to climb. In the many times I tried to quit rabbinical school, one of the reasons that I thought about quitting rabbinical school is my singing voice. I don't have a nice singing voice. And I thought, how in the world am I supposed to do a job in which I'm supposed to stand up in front of people and sing week in and week out? Now, I didn't know I'd have the blessing of Cantor Amy in my life. But still, I mean, that's a barrier for me. It's a barrier that all of this stuff is sung, because I just can't participate at the level that many of you on this screen, and certainly many of the professionals I work with, can. So that's my barrier. Other people's barrier is the Hebrew. Other people's barrier is the theology. There's a lot that makes it hard. And yes, of course, the goal is to try to find meaning in it, even though it's hard. Maybe a little bit because it's hard. Yeah. Yeah, please, Esther.
People will often stop me and ask how I became so familiar and so comfortable with davening. And when I tell them that I went to Hebrew school 4 days a week, that I went to Friday night services, that it was required that I go to Shabbos morning junior congregation, and if that wasn't enough, I went to Sunday school, then the picture kind of unfolds. And yes, it is this repetitive. My baby brother used to come with us to junior congregation. He couldn't read Hebrew, he couldn't read English, but he could daven with the best of us because he came every Shabbos and he learned by rote how to daven. So that comfort level comes over years and years, like you said, of participation. And it doesn't come easily, but it does come eventually if you come often enough.
Isn't it interesting how when I ask the question, how is prayer embarrassing? There are so many hands. That so many of us can relate in one way or another to this feeling, even in this gathering. This is a group of Jewish insiders. I hate to break this to you, but if you were taking a Heschel class on Wednesday nights, you are a Jewish insider. How much the more so for the great majority of American Jews who feel no direct connection or sense of belonging. Prayer is hard. It's hard. And it is, in Heschel's words, embarrassing, because we are supposed to be communing with the divine. We're supposed to be reaching this great sense of spiritual transformation and unification. And yet, many of us struggle to get there. Unless we are beneficiaries of a tremendous amount of education. And even then, Esther, it doesn't always stick. I know a lot of kids who did just as much Jewish education who don't want anything to do with Shoal. Right? Some of that just comes down to us odd birds here who find some meaning in this stuff. I proudly count myself among them. Let's look just a little bit more. So some of the doctrines of prayer that don't work, he says. The first one, I guess we're only going to cover the first one, the doctrine of agnosticism. The doctrine of agnosticism claims that prayer is rooted in superstition. It is one of humanity's great mistakes, a desperate effort of bewildered creatures to come to terms with surrounding mystery. Thus, prayer is a fraud. To the worshiping man, we must say, "Fool, why do you in vain beseech with childish prayers things which no day ever did bring, will bring, or could bring? Since it is a dangerous fraud, the synagogue must be abolished. A vast number of people have, indeed, eliminated prayer from their lives. They have made an end to that illusion. There are some people who believe that the only way to revitalize the synagogue is to minimize the importance of prayer and to convert the synagogue into a center." He is right here directly criticizing the Reconstructionist movement. He is criticizing Mordechai Kaplan, who he would then go on to serve on the faculty with JTS, who emphasized the idea of Judaism as civilization and promoted the idea of synagogue as cultural center. It's something which the Talmud characterizes as al shekorin li'aron kodesh. This is a line from the Talmud that says, "And miss the holy, and just see a cabinet," or who will look to the holy sanctuary and just see an assembly hall. Let us face the situation. This is the law of life. Just as man cannot live without a soul, Judaism cannot survive without God. Our soul withers without prayer. A synagogue in which men no longer aspire to prayer is not a compromise, but a defeat, a perversion, not a concession. To pray with kavanah may be difficult. To pray without it is ludicrous. Harsh. What's Heschel saying? He's saying one approach that we might take is to throw up our hands and say, what can you do? Most modern Jews don't want to pray. And so we'll bring people together for pickleball. So we'll bring people together for ice cream social. So we'll bring people together for politics. So we'll bring people together for any number of other points of gathering. And we won't worry so much about what happens in the sanctuary. That will be there for those people who want it. But we will be a place for all people. Not with a center of the wheel, but with many doors of entrance. This is a common strategy in synagogue life today, right? Sometimes it's referred to as the cineplex model, right? The synagogue that has many different things going on. If you like the prayer, great. If you don't like the prayer, come for the this, come for the yoga, come for the coffee schmooze out on the patio. I subscribe in some ways to this model to say, I just want people in the building. I want Jews gathering with other Jews. And if you find meaning in what we're doing together spiritually, great. But if you find more meaning in somewhere else, I'm just glad you're here. Heschel, I don't know, would slap my face. He kind of just did. And he said, you can't let your people off, and by extension, you can't let yourself off too easily. He's talking to a room full of rabbis. Don't allow the core function of the spiritual meeting place to become an auxiliary service. Again, we're about to approve a budget. In the process in which a synagogue board looks at a budget, and I'm looking at some past ritual chairs here on the screen, we know that, there's a lineup of priorities and a discussion. Should we really be spending on the prayer service? Don't we really have to fix the plumbing in the bathroom? Right? That's a real discussion at a board level at every synagogue, right? This is one of our functions. It's ritual, along with our many other functions. Heschel says this is the existential reason why the synagogue exists. It's not, there's a concept in kashrut of ikar and tefel. What's the central piece of the meal and what are the side dishes to the meal? And it has to do with what you say a blessing over. You say a blessing over the essential thing rather than the side thing. Is prayer the ikar? Is prayer the essence of what we're doing? Or is it one of the many side dishes on the plate? And Heschel challenges a room full of rabbis to say, don't allow the synagogue service to become one of the things. Place it at the center. Some of us may disagree. Some of us may vehemently disagree with Heschel's approach here. Some of us may say, no, our purpose in creating spaces for Jewish life today ought to be about creating many doors in. There's a wonderful organization specifically targeting interfaith families called 18 Doors. And their whole philosophy is, if you don't like this door, come through that door. If you don't like that door, come through that door. There is a whole wide range of doors in this 3,000-year Jewish civilization that you can walk through. Just find the door that speaks to you. Heschel offers a provocative challenge to say, not all doors are created equal. The door of ice cream socials is not the same as the door of Kol Nidre, and the door of shul pickleball is not the same as the Torah service. I don't know. It's worthy to debate. And I think what he would ask, and with this I'll close, I think what he would ask would be for this to be the debate that's happening at synagogue board meetings. For this to be the active discussion among people, he's talking to rabbis who are convening prayer services, in which we talk about what is our essential mission? What is most important? What do we exist for? And maybe we'll come to the same conclusion as him, or maybe we'll come to a different conclusion. But are we asking the question? Are we asking what's at our core? What is most essential? Are we allowing ourselves off the hook too easily? The core of every prophetic critique. You've allowed yourself off the hook too easily. We've allowed ourselves to default to, well, the majority of the people don't come for this, so let's find a thing they will come for. Rather than, what do we need to do in order to make it so the communities are moving towards an authentic relationship with prayer and by extension with God? Is that a possible goal? Or is that a goal that we've only told ourselves is impossible because we haven't tried hard enough? It's a provocative question. I don't necessarily know that, I certainly don't feel that I have the answer, but I appreciate Heschel's challenge to ask it. Thank you, everybody. Have a good week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.